Welcome everyone to the Ready for the Draft podcast. I'm your host, Gregg Schutze. This is episode 19 of the 2021 podcast series, taking a look at the draft eligible prospects and getting you ready for the NFL draft, which is set to begin April 29th. And I'll tell you what, even though the combine is not going to happen in the traditional sense in Indianapolis, the pre-draft process is already in full swing. And I'll tell you what, we've already had two big moves at the quarterback position, and a three-time Defensive Player of the Year asked for his release, and it was granted. And I'll tell you what, we also have some moves that haven't been made yet that we're still waiting on pins and needles to see if it does happen. The Jets, are they going to trade Sam Darnold? Are they not? Are they going to stick with him and build around him? Or are they going to decide to go ahead and get a new quarterback there for the new regime under Robert Saleh, the new head coach? And then there's Deshaun Watson in Houston. Houston's already said that he's not on the market, but Bleacher Report reported that Carolina is actually trying to make some moves with their salary cap to then make a run at Deshaun Watson. If Carolina is not successful in getting Deshaun Watson, you have to expect Carolina to use that number 8 overall pick on a quarterback. The question then is going to be, is it going to be Trey Lance, or will you see Mac Jones in that spot? I think his performance at the Senior Bowl with Matt Rule, something to keep an eye on. Just saying, that could be the fit for Mac Jones and potentially be a top 10 pick. Wouldn't surprise me. We saw Daniel Jones. A lot of people didn't think he was a top 10 pick. Dave Gettleman pulled the trigger, number 6 overall. So we've seen this happen before. So I could absolutely see this happen with Carolina there at number 8 if they can't get their guy in Deshaun Watson. But the moves that did happen, first you look at the Lions and trading Matthew Stafford. Now Stafford comes to the organization and says, look, I want to challenge for a Super Bowl. I want to go to a contender, ask for his trade. And new GM Brad Holmes finds his dancing partner in his old boss, Les Snead. That's right. Brad Holmes was with the Rams before he took over the GM spot there with the Lions. And you know what? The Rams, Les Snead, and Sean McVay, they don't believe in first round picks apparently, because when they traded to get Matthew Stafford, they traded away their next 2 first-round picks. They couldn't trade away the one from this year because they already traded it to Jacksonville for Jalen Ramsey. Plus, they gave up a third-round pick from this year's draft and Jared Goff. Now, Jared Goff is one of those curious cases. Didn't look great in under Jeff Fisher. Sean McVay comes in, looks like the quarterback whisperer. Suddenly, Jared Goff looks like he could potentially be that elite quarterback. But after the Super Bowl appearance there for the Rams, Jared Goff really up and down, and it seemed like really kind of wore out his welcome there with Sean McVay. I think he got a little frustrated with Jared Goff that he didn't really take that leap that everyone was expecting him to. Now he's going with the proven commodity in Matthew Stafford, a guy that a lot of people think is a top 10 quarterback in the league. You're going to get some toughness there at the quarterback position, a guy with a tremendous arm. I think they'll be able to do some things with their offense that they weren't able to do with Jared Goff. The Lions, there's talk that maybe at number 7, they'll still go with the quarterback, even though they have Jared Goff on the roster. Let's pump the brakes there. I think the Lions have too many other needs. I don't see them going quarterback number 7 overall. But we'll get into that talk here in just a little bit. The other trade involved the Philadelphia Eagles, and I'll tell you what, the Carson Wentz saga is finally over, but Philly could not pull off a deal anywhere close to Matthew Stafford. They wound up trading him to the Colts, where Carson Wentz could be reunited with Frank Reich, and they end up getting a third-round pick in this year's draft and a second-round pick in next year's draft in return. I think Carson Wentz, with injury history and just the inability to play consistent ball when healthy, really led to that. He wasn't commanding as much on the market as someone like Matthew Stafford, a proven commodity at the quarterback position. And then there's J.J. Watt. And with J.J. Watt, when you look at him, Houston has been his home. He's done so much there for that organization, but clearly they're in a huge rebuild. David Culley coming in as the head coach. They knew that Deshaun Watson was asking for a trade. Now J.J. Watt really looking to go to a contender, whether it's Pittsburgh, could potentially even be Cleveland. There are a lot of teams, about a dozen teams that are actually looking to bring in J.J. Watt. And look, we know that J.J. Watt has been beat up with some of the injuries, but when healthy, he's still one of the top defensive players in the league. So he's probably the number one free agent commodity that's out there. And so a lot of things that still could potentially happen. I think Odell Beckham Jr. could potentially be on the move. There's talk that Stephon Gilmore with the Patriots, he could potentially be on the move. A lot of moves, big moves with big name players could potentially happen this offseason. Really unprecedented in these times. So it'll be interesting to see exactly how everything plays out. And that's what makes it so difficult with the mock drafts, is trying to decide exactly where to go right now. It's really kind of a crapshoot because you don't know what free agency is going to hold. You really don't know what March is going to look like, and into April, really before you have a great picture of it. But it's still fun to go ahead and put those mock drafts together, really start taking a look at what are the team needs as of right now, and really how things are starting to shape up. And I'll tell you what, I know we started with my first 20 picks in my mock draft in the last podcast, and things have already changed. I've already started looking at things with that mock draft. And as I started getting into the second and third rounds, I started looking at, when might a team pull the trigger on different draft needs. And I started to kind of reshuffle my mock draft just a little bit, because I'm also looking at the players and guys who, when they would come off the board, and I was looking at some of my guys that were falling into the second round and some of the guys that had even falling into the third round. And I said, wait, this guy is going to come off the board in round one. I need to make sure that I'm really making my adjustments and finding the right fit for them in round number one. So what we're going to do with this podcast is we're actually going to walk through the first 3 rounds of the draft. We're going to do it pretty quickly, and we're going to make sure that we hit on every team. But we're going to go ahead and take a look at those and really talk through some of these picks and the rationale behind them. So since we've got a lot of picks to cover, 106 in all, we're going to go ahead and get things started right away. And the Jacksonville Jaguars, obviously, Urban Meyer, track record of rebuilding programs, and everything's been at the collegiate level to this point, but now he's got the keys to the Jacksonville Jaguars, and he's getting himself Trevor Lawrence at the quarterback position, 6'6", 220 pounds, the junior out of Clemson. We know what Trevor Lawrence is going to be bringing to the table there. And so, I think Urban Meyer, throughout the rest of the draft, he's going to be looking to not only upgrade some of that defense, but find some weapons there for Trevor Lawrence. Also needs to make sure that he's protecting his investments. So I think as you go through this draft, that's some of the themes that you're going to be seeing. I think at number 25, you can go in a number of directions. They do need an offensive lineman, depending on what happens with Cam Robinson. He gave up 5 sacks a season ago. Now he's a free agent. He may command top dollar on the market, so there's a chance that someone like Dylan Radins could potentially be in play here. But I think, Jacksonville, do they really want a rookie left tackle protecting the blind side of the rookie quarterback? That's going to be the big question mark. Do you really want to pull the trigger in round number 1? I think maybe it might be best to wait with that pick. They also need a safety. I could see Trevon Merrick potentially coming off the board here. There's always going to be a safety that ends up popping into round number 1. We saw that with Darnell Savage, Jonathan Abram. I remember when Carl Joseph came off the board in the first half of round number 1 a few years ago. So there's a chance that Merrick could be the guy here, but I like Christian Barmore. Now look, Pro Football Focus noted that he's only played 747 snaps, so not even 800 snaps at Bama. But when he was on the field, he was a difference maker. 8 sacks as an interior pass rusher. That tells you something there. That a quick penetration, getting into the backfield. Jacksonville needs a defensive line help. Taven Bryan has failed to live up to expectations, so that means that they really need to attack the middle of that defense. the front has just been porous against the run, struggle to put pressure on the quarterback. They only had 18 sacks. So you're able to not only take Josh Allen on the outside, but now you've got Christian Barmore pushing the pocket on the inside. And look, he was virtually unblockable in the college football national championship. He was just harassing Justin Fields all game long. Christian Barmore, 6'5", 310 pounds, makes a ton of sense here. Bama, yet another guy coming off the board in round number 1. You look at round 2, and I think Jacksonville, they ranked 26th in the league in pass defense. And you look at it, to make matters worse, DJ Hayden, Trey Herndon, and Sidney Jones are all free agents. I think when you look at this, they need to find somebody who can, with some size to play opposite C.J. Henderson, their first pick from a season ago, number 9 overall. And I'm looking at Kelvin Joseph. Now, Kelvin Joseph had a phenomenal redshirt sophomore season there for the Kentucky Wildcats, and there's a chance that he can end up moving into round number 1. Right now, I only have 3 corners coming off the board in round 1, and traditionally speaking, you're looking at more than that more often than not. In last year's draft, we actually saw 6 corners come off the board in round 1, so there's a great chance that Kelvin Joseph can be one of those corners come off in round 1. But if the Jaguars stay put at number 33 and Joseph's on the board, you have to imagine that they're going to jump at the chance to get him. Good size for the position, fluid hips, turns and runs, provides blanket coverage on the outside, tremendous ball skills as well, arriving at the catch point. 4 interceptions, led the SEC. Keep an eye there for Kelvin Joseph. I think that makes a ton of sense. And then number 45 overall, the Jags sitting there. I think they address the secondary again. Again, they could potentially go offensive line. There could be some other help. But I'm looking at number 45, taking a safety. Andre Cisco out of Syracuse, 6'2", 203, the junior. I think when you look at Cisco, he burst onto that national scene with 7 interceptions as a true freshman, leaves Syracuse with 13 picks, had another 14 pass breakups as well. But this guy, he's fearless. He's a risk taker, which is also why he's so successful in the back end of that defense. He's always thinking that he can make a play on the football, has the speed to get there in a hurry, tremendous ball skills that are needed to make that play. But that gambler mentality does get him into trouble. I think he's susceptible to being out of position, because he, according to Pro Football Focus, he also gave up 8 touchdowns in his career. So he's definitely a high risk, high reward player in the deep middle of that defense. He is going to come downhill and hit you in the mouth and the box as well. So Cisco, some people have him coming off the board in round 1. I think the gambler mentality may push him to round 2. And if I'm Urban Meyer, I want to go get a playmaker on the back end of that defense. I can live with some of the gambler mentality, if he can make the plays that Cisco's been able to showcase. Round 3, 65 overall, I think they go after Amari Rodgers. Give Trevor Lawrence, a familiar face there in the slot. Amari Rodgers, look, he's 5'10", 210, very sudden off the line, can make you miss in the open field, but he's built like a running back, making him tough to bring down in the open field. I really like that pick. I think that's one that you put him in the offense with DJ Chark, who's finally having a breakout, had a 1,000-yard season, and Laviska Shenault, who when healthy can be another dynamic receiver as well for them. So I think that's going to be interesting for them to play out as things go along. I think the Jaguars ultimately, you'll probably see them come off the board with the tackle, probably in round 4. Potentially a tight end. They have 2 picks in round 4, so I think a tight end like Kenny Yeboah would make sense there as well. So that's the Jacksonville Jaguars. So now we're going to move to another team with multiple first-round picks, and that's the New York Jets. And as I mentioned, Sam Darnold in the final year of his rookie deal. Would the Jets pick up a 5th-year option? Likely not. So I think this is kind of, if he does stay with the team, this would be his audition to really show what he can do. In his defense, I think the Jets need to build more around him. There's really a lack of depth at any of the skill positions. Really needs to add some weapons there for him, and also address that offensive line. So this pick, if it's not a quarterback, if Joe Douglas says let's build around Sam Darnold, really give him a chance to succeed, then this pick could either be Jamar Chase out of LSU, or Penei Sewell. I think if you believe that George Fant can be a right tackle, then I think you probably go receiver. And even if, when you're looking at your board, even if you think George Fant is going to be your right tackle of the future, then Penei Sewell and really Rashawn Slater for that matter, they can kick inside to guard. Penei Sewell reminds me a lot of Brandon Sheriff, so I could absolutely see them really upgrading that guard position with Penei Sewell. Would you take him at number 2 overall? Maybe the Jets then trade down with a quarterback needy team and potentially still land either. You'd have to move out down no further than maybe the top 7 or 8 to be able to get a chance to land either Sewell or Slater, but it could definitely happen. I have him taking Zach Wilson, at least as of right now, because I think there's a great chance that they do end up going with a new quarterback, although I think Sam Darnold would fit well in Mike LaFleur's West Coast offense. So this is one where I continue to go back and forth on, but Zach Wilson, to me, he's my number 2 quarterback in this year's draft. A guy who is just so explosive. This is a guy, when he gets outside the pocket, a lot of quarterbacks are very deliberate with their delivery. They'll square their shoulders, and then the ball, the hips and the shoulder, or hips and the arm come around. Everything is all one real quick explosive movement, very sharp. And people talk about his base, that he's not always throwing with a solid base. But I'll tell you what, neither did Patrick Mahomes coming out of Texas Tech. I talked about how he would move left or right, move forward or backward, a lot of times off the back foot, and still be able to deliver it with velocity. Zach Wilson is able to do the same thing. I've heard some people talk about the inconsistency with his deep ball accuracy. I beg to differ with that. I think this is one of the things to where he was making throws that very few guys in the NFL even can make on the run. It reminds me a lot of Josh Allen when he was coming out of Wyoming and his ability to push the ball down the field. I think Zach Wilson, though, is a bit more accurate than Josh Allen coming out of college. So I think this would be a nice match there for the Jets. But like I said, we'll have to keep an eye on Sam Darnold's future, because if Sam Darnold stays, I think he can fit in well with what Mike LaFleur wants to do. Now, the Jets 23, they could go receiver. I think you could go Kadarius Toney, Rashad Bateman, Terrace Marshall, even go running back and go Travis Etienne here. But I think at the end of the day, if Azeez Ojulari is sitting here, you need an edge rusher. Absolutely, Terrell Basham and Jordan Jenkins, who combined for just 5.5 sacks, the starters there at the edge rush. They're both free agents. Ojulari at 6'3", 240 pounds, might be the most dynamic edge rusher in the draft. He's very twitchy, shows tremendous change of directions, and has the flexibility to turn the corner in a hurry. Once he gets that edge, he'll flatten out in explosive speed to get to the quarterback. Now, if you saw that 3-sack performance against Cincinnati in the Peach Bowl, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And imagine teaming Ojulari with Quinnen Williams. That would be fun to watch for sure. Now you move on to round number 2, and what do the Jets do? Hey, you can wait until round 2 and still end up landing a receiver. How about Terrace Marshall? There's a chance he could come off the board in round 1, possibly to the Ravens, but at 6'1", 200 pounds, this is a guy, look, he led LSU at that receiver position, has that blend of size, speed, and athleticism to match up either on the outside or in the slot. And look, the Jets, Jamison Crowder was the team's leader in all categories, 59 catches, 699 yards, 6 touchdowns, clearly nothing to write home about. He is reliable. Denzel Mims is showing promise, but the Jets need additional weapons, so that makes sense to get Marshall here. I think 34 has to be the best receiver that's on the board, in my opinion. So then the Jets, round number 3, this is where things kind of get interesting. I think you can get a running back as well for the Jets, and I'm looking at Michael Carter out of North Carolina. Frank Gore led the team in rushing with just 653 yards. And then when you look at that, Ty Johnson, LaMichael Pirine, Josh Adams, that trio finished with just 643 yards. And the group just tallied 49 receptions in 2020. So the Jets, they need a versatile running back for whoever's playing quarterback. And I think Michael Carter, 5'8", 199 pounds, coming out of North Carolina, finished with back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons on the ground, also hauling in 82 passes in his career for the Tar Heels. He makes a ton of sense. If you didn't get a chance to see him make plays at the Senior Bowl, he was a guy that he was bouncing off of tackles. He looked tremendous, and so I'm looking at the Jets, and that would make a ton of sense for me. And then I think as you go later on into the draft, number 87 overall, this is a pick that they got from Seattle, and I think they could potentially go for another edge rusher like Ojulari in round 1, because they just need to inject some life into that pass rush. When you're looking at that group, just really nothing to write home about to this point. I think Basham and Jenkins, really are more role players, should not be starting. And so I look at a guy like Quincy Roche, explosive pass rusher, extremely productive, 30.5 sacks at Temple in Miami. And yes, he struggles to get off blocks as a defensive end, so that's why I think he needs to play in space, be an outside linebacker in a 34 defense, so he can showcase the elite athleticism. I think he needs to develop in coverage, so I'd expect him to start off as a situational pass rusher, but I think he'll end up, he has starter potential at the next level. Look, he's 6'4", 235, needs to add some weight, needs to add a little bit there to the bones, but I think he's absolutely a guy that can play at the next level. I think 4th round, I said we'd only do the first 3 rounds, but I'm looking at Kendrick Green out of Illinois. Could potentially come off the board on day 2, but if he falls to the 4th round, the Jets would need to snatch him up, give them, another interior presence if, again, they don't take Penei Sewell in round number 1. Dolphins are another team that has that luxury of having multiple first-round picks, and they actually get the third pick overall from Houston in the Laramie Tunsil deal. And this is a pick that I think, when you look at it, it really makes sense that it's going to come down to one of 2 players. And I think a lot of people are talking about, well, what about Penei Sewell? You could potentially have bookend tackles, which is true, but I think you get the playmaker at receiver first, and then you can get that tackle either later on in round 1 or potentially even in round 2. I think the depth at the top of that offensive tackle position will allow them to be able to do that. This pick, again, is going to come down to Jamar Chase or Devontae Smith. I think you've got, Tua Tagovailoa and Devontae Smith. Look, that was the pair that caught that, threw and caught that touchdown pass as true freshmen against Georgia to win the national title. And look, how could you not have the Heisman Trophy winner, the AP Player of the Year, Walter Camp Player of the Year, not come off the board in the first 3 picks? Ultimately, could Jamar Chase come off the board here? Absolutely. He did do a lot of the same things that Devontae Smith did as a sophomore. Devontae Smith as a senior, I know a lot with the analytics. They talk about that age can factor into it, and the breakout age. But I'm still looking at Devontae Smith. This is a guy that is a total package. Yes, he is 6 foot and 175 pounds, but I think of Marvin Harrison when I watch him play. He's explosive. He runs excellent routes, tremendous hands. Look, they don't call him the Slim Reaper for nothing. I think this is a guy that could end up being a star, and it makes a ton of sense for Miami to take him there with number 3. If he does fall, I think maybe Philly at number 6 if they don't go Kyle Pitts. Could also fall to the Giants there at number 11. It really is going to kind of depend on how things shape up as we move through this pre-draft process. Sitting at 18, the Dolphins. Look, again, could go in a few different directions. They could go defense. They could go offensive tackle. Christian Darrisaw is sitting, could potentially be sitting there. And at linebacker, potentially Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah if he's on the board. But I'm thinking running back. When you look at the running back position, you've got Myles Gaskin, Salvon Ahmed. Really nothing to write home about there. Myles Gaskin, more of a complimentary back. Najee Harris, 6'2", 230 pounds. A dude that, look, he has the power and contact balance between the tackles, the speed and athleticism on the perimeter to run by you, or, Nick McLeod, but he can jump over defenders as well, and then display his soft hands in the passing game. Also has that clear understanding of his role in pass protection. This is a guy who's always in the right position. That's why he's my number 1 running back and not Travis Etienne, is because he does a tremendous job as a pass protector. Now look, 2 years ago, another former Crimson Tide running back by the name of Josh Jacobs came off the board in round number 1 to the Raiders, and he's a star. I think Harris has a chance to be able to do the exact same thing. So Miami gets a couple of skill position guys in the first round. And so now you're looking at round number 2 at number 36 overall. Miami, again, another pick from Houston. This is where I think they go Dylan Radins. A 6'6", 298, North Dakota State. And Dylan Radins, look, 2-year starter for the Bison, tremendous physicality in the run game, 63 knockdowns in 2019 according to Pro Football Focus, has a tremendous get off, and able to convert that speed to power to generate a lot of movement. Also equally adept in pass protection, not giving up a single sack, holding down Trey Lance's blind side. I think he also showed at the Senior Bowl, he can silence all those skeptics thinking that an FCS, offensive tackle shouldn't be taken so early. So I think you go offensive line, which then allows you to convert to that defense and really pay some attention to Brian Flores' defense there with the second pick in round number 2. Go after Chaz Surratt out of North Carolina, 6'2", 230 pounds. Surratt is such an intriguing prospect, converted from quarterback to inside linebacker following his sophomore season. Surratt, look, over 200 tackles, 22.5 going for loss, 12.5 sacks, 2 interceptions, 5 pass breakups, and a pair of forced fumbles. The quarterback instincts allows him to play fast. He can diagnose plays in a hurry. And look, this guy, he's just scratching the surface on the type of plays that he can make. He's the type of 3-down linebacker that Brian Flores is going to want on his defense. And look, Landon Roberts is a free agent. I think the Finns could use an upgrade, and Chaz Surratt is absolutely the type of guy that can make that happen. Moving on to, let's see, round number 3. When you look at Miami in round number 3, I actually have them going offensive line again. And I'm actually looking at Quinn Miners, 6'3", 320 pounds out of Wisconsin Whitewater. This was a guy that I really wasn't familiar with until he got to the Senior Bowl. Then I got to watch some of his games and really watched him there at the Senior Bowl. And this dude, man, he's a bad dude. He's physical. He's a mauler. He wants to beat you up. And he played on the outside there for Wisconsin Whitewater. But, he really showed that he's going to make his money there along the interior of the line, whether it's a guard or center. I think he can absolutely be that guy. Dolphins have a need on the interior of that line. They drafted, a season ago, they drafted Robert Hunt. And I think with the addition of Dylan Radins, he'll be able to move inside to guard his natural position. They drafted Austin Jackson, obviously, in the first round to play left tackle. And then you also have Solomon Kinley, who could end up being that left guard. That center position needs to be addressed. Ted Karras is a free agent. Quinn Miners makes perfect sense to me. You add him to the mix, and it seems to be a match made in heaven. There for Miami. They get some physicality there for the running game, and Najee Harris. That'd be a lot of fun to watch as we get things going. So now, Atlanta at number 4, Justin Fields, still my guy there for them. 6'3", 228 pounds out of Ohio State. We know what Justin Fields is capable of. And when you're looking at this, Matt Ryan, he's going to be 36 years of age to start the season. Arthur Blank's already come out and said that we're not moving the guy. There's no plans to move Matt Ryan. But look, and really Matt Ryan, hasn't missed very many games. I believe it was 8 games over the span of his career. So he's been a guy that has been very durable. I'm sorry, just missed 3 games since 2008. Conversely, the defense hasn't finished higher than 20th in total defense in 4 of the last 5 seasons. Been in the bottom third of the league in sacks since 2018. So this pick could absolutely be Micah Parsons. Get them a pass rusher. They're at that linebacker position. It could potentially, if they want to go with another defensive player, I think they probably look to trade down with one of the quarterback needy teams. But if they stand pat there at number 4, I think all signs will be pointing to taking that quarterback of the future for their head coach, Arthur Smith. Let Matt Ryan play out his contract. He signed through the 2020. Let's see, he's in the 3rd year of a 5-year deal, so he still has a couple more years left. But Justin Fields is one of those guys who, he's tremendously accurate, very tough. The pocket presence is unreal. His ability to move, and keep those eyes down the field, throws his receivers open. The ball placement is excellent. Throws with anticipation. The arm strength seems to be getting better and better. It looked better this year than it did a season ago. So I think Atlanta, it behooved them to look for the quarterback of the future. I think Atlanta isn't prepared to be this high, next season. So why not get the quarterback while you can? Moving on to round 2. If they don't get their pass rusher in round 1, it's imperative that they do in round 2. At number 35 overall, take Joseph Osai out of Texas if he's there. He may come off the board to KC there with the 32nd pick overall. But Osai, if he's there, 6'4", 253, the junior. Look, this is a guy who was living in opposing backfields, quick first step, powerful hands, relentless motor, 15.5 sacks. 15.5 tackles for loss, and then 5.5 sacks his past seasons. But when you look at it, it really doesn't speak to just how often he was living in opposing backfields, just how disruptive he was. If you watched him at the end of that Oklahoma State game, chase down Spencer Sanders from behind and ultimately won that game for Texas, because Oklahoma State, they had a chance to score, and he ultimately brought them down in overtime, which sealed the deal. Atlanta, look, they're struggling to get after the passer yet again. Finished with just 29 on the year. Good for a tie for 23rd in the league. What makes things worse is only 2 players finished the season with more than three sacks. Osai makes a ton of sense if he's there on the board. And then you move on to round number 3. When you look at the Falcons in round 3, I think you have to look at potentially addressing that running game. That running game finished 27th in the league. And now, their top 2 leading rushers, Todd Gurley, Brian Hill, both hitting free agency. Now's the time to get that running back. And I think Javian Hawkins out of Louisville, look, he's 5'9", 195. The redshirt sophomore is not the biggest back, but he has tremendous lower body strength, which allows him to just bounce off would-be tacklers. Just looks like a pinball. He's not only tremendously sudden, but he also has that second year to go the distance. I'm a big fan of Javian Hawkins. I think 3rd round would be great value for him. And Atlanta could then shore up that running game. I think that would definitely help. So they go quarterback, defensive end, running back with their first 3 picks in the draft. Cincinnati sitting there at number 5. This is an interesting team. And Zach Taylor, he's got his Heisman Trophy winner, Joe Burrow. And look, Joe Burrow was 2-7-1 in his 10 starts at Cincy. But he did complete over 64% of his passes, threw for over 2,800 yards with 13 touchdowns and just 5 interceptions. People are still knocking him because of the lack of arm strength, and is he really going to be a guy that can excel at the next level? Blah, blah, blah. The haters are going to hate. But look, he also led the league in sacks with 32 and hits 72. Thank you, Pro Football Focus, yet again during that time. Week 11, he had that ACL tear. That was against Washington, and since then, Cincinnati really struggled to get anything going offensively. So there's talk that potentially they could go after Kyle Pitts. I know AJ Green is a free agent, may not be back. You can add a pass catching tight end to the mix. And look, Kyle Pitts is special, but when you're looking at the Bengals and you look at that offensive line and the number of sacks that were given up, man, you have to protect your investment. You've got Jonah Williams. He's shown promise, but that right knee injury cut his season short last year. Bobby Hart and Hakeem Adeniji, they filled in for Williams. They combined to give up 8 sacks. So I think they got to have that upgrade. And look, Penei Sewell, he solidified himself as a top offensive tackle prospect, not allowing a single sack. In 936 pass blocking snaps in 2019, and just won over just under 1,400 career snaps in his 2 seasons for the Ducks. I think people give him a hard time about some of the reps with his footwork, but this is a guy, look, he's still shown, that tremendous power. I think he shows better than average, movement skills laterally. And look, is he a generational prospect? I don't know that I necessarily go that far just yet, but you see how talented he is. And if you can clean up some of the footwork issues, he can be a monster there for the Bengals. And I think if you have bookend tackles with Jonah Williams and Penei Sewell, I think you feel much more confident in your health if you're Joe Burrow. Moving on to round 2, talking about that tight end. How about Pat Freiermuth out of Penn State? Baby Gronk, 6'5", 258. And, he lived up to that nickname. He's a punishing inline blocker, both in the run game and taking care of his quarterback. But he was also, a great job sealing the edge, generated movement when squaring up defenders, picking off moving targets at the second level. But he was equally dangerous in the passing game, offering soft hands, the ability to stretch defenses vertically up the seam. And look, made plays after the catch just like Gronk, and had a knack for finding the end zone with 16 touchdowns in 3 seasons. Very reminiscent yet again of Gronk, further solidifying that nickname of Baby Gronk, and give yet another weapon for Joe Burrow to team with Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins. I think it makes a ton of sense. You can wait until round 2 to get your tight end, and again, I think Kyle Pitts is one of those tight end prospects that we haven't seen before, but I think you can let's protect Joe Burrow first. Moving on to round 3, Bengals. Look, the pass rush was a disaster. Only 17 sacks, and now your top sack artist in Carl Lawson, who had just 5.5 sacks, by the way. He's now a free agent, so I think the situation is dire to get a pass rusher. And I'm looking at Ellerson Smith out of Northern Iowa. Look, he's 6'7", 245, was just a menace for Northern Iowa. Racked up 14 sacks in 2019, and as we know, FCS did not play in 2020. But look, the kid has a tremendous length to keep blockers at bay, secures that edge, uses the quickness to beat the interior lineman as well, rushing the quarterback on the inside. You saw him in the one-on-ones take some of those inside rushes and get home to the quarterback in the Senior Bowl. So I'm looking at Ellerson Smith. I think that would make a ton of sense there in round 3, number 69 overall for Cincinnati. So let me move on to number 6, the Philadelphia Eagles. What do the Eagles do here? They finished with a 4-11-1 record. Carson Wentz, we know the disaster that happened there. He's now in Indianapolis, taking over for Phillip Rivers, who retired. So what do the Eagles do? Are they moving the team to Jalen Hurts? I think they kind of have to, but they're going to bring in a quarterback to duel with him. The question is going to be, are you going to bring in a rookie? So you'll have two, a second-year quarterback and a rookie quarterback really duking it out, or are they going to bring in a veteran? I think, to me, all signs point to them bringing in a veteran to compete with Jalen Hurts. I could be wrong, but I think this number 6 pick, look, they could go Micah Parsons, because they need linebackers. They've always needed linebackers, and we keep talking about them potentially drafting a linebacker in round 1, and it just doesn't happen. They could go with Kyle Pitts, because Zach Ertz, his time in Philly looks to be done. He'll either be released or traded. And Dallas Goedert needs a running partner. And so I think Kyle Pitts makes a lot of sense there as well. But I'm looking at Jamar Chase. Look, he's 6 foot, 208. When Travis Fulgham, a practice squad call-up, leads your team in receiving, changes have to be made at the receiver position. Alshon Jeffrey just continues to be banged up, has yet to play a full slate of games since 2013. Deshaun Jackson's been released. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, the 2019 second-round pick, hasn't been very productive, just 14 receptions in 24 games over the past 2 seasons. And then Jalen Reagor, a first-round pick from a season ago, showed that he was a vertical threat, started all 11 games in which he played, but battling some of those injuries, only caught 31 passes for 396 yards, saw the end zone just one time. Jamar Chase is your number 1. You can have Reagor be a guy that can stretch teams vertically, but Jamar Chase, let's not forget, don't have that recency bias. Jamar Chase, 84 catches, 1,780 yards, which is an average of 21.2 yards per reception, by the way, and 20 touchdowns, the same total as Devontae Smith in 2019, catching passes from Joe Burrow. And I'll tell you what, Jamar Chase, could he come off the board at number 3? Yes. Could he come off the board at number 6? Absolutely. And I think this ultimately is the right pick for Philly. At the end of the day, though, keep an eye on Kyle Pitts. I just think Jamar Chase, you have to go there if he's there. 37 overall in the second round. I'm looking at Ifeatu Melifonwu, 6'3", 213 pounds, the corner out of Syracuse. Darius Slade is cornerback 1 for Philly, but Avonte Maddox, playing opposite him. I think you can probably get an upgrade there. And look, Melifonwu, I think second round picks run in the family. His brother Obi was a 2017 for second round pick. Has excellent, the younger Melifonwu, again, has excellent size like his brother. Uses that to his advantage both in man and zone coverage. 23 passes defended, evidence of the ball skills as well. And despite his size, he can sink his hips and make some pretty fluid transitions without giving up a ton of ground. So to me, I think Melifonwu would be a nice addition to that secondary and could potentially take over that starting spot early in his career. So moving on, and if we move to round number 3, I mentioned the tight end position and Zach Ertz potentially moving on. I think Brevin Jordan could potentially fall to the beginning of round 3, and I think Philly sitting there at 70 overall. Jordan, look, he's a little undersized. He's 6'3", 235. Has only played in 26 games over the last 3 years for the Hurricanes, so he hasn't played a full season. So that can be a bit of a concern. So that could potentially drop his draft stock. That 40 time for him, I think, is going to loom large for him. Evan Engram was a first-round pick, ran in the 4.4s. You saw Hunter Bryant running in the 4.7s, 4.8s, and he wasn't even drafted. So I think Brevin Jordan has to at least run into that 4.5 range, given his stature, in order to be a guy that can potentially be a day 2 pick. But I think what really sets him apart, though, is his physicality as a blocker. Inline blocker, I think that's what will make him more valuable, and I think he'll still end up getting drafted. I think he'll end up getting pushed to round 3, though. Very athletic, versatile, can line up all over the field, reliable hands, stretches defenses, makes plays all over the field after the catch. You pair him with Dallas Goedert, will give Jalen Hurts a nice target there at the tight end position. I think that definitely makes some sense to me. Let's see what else we've got there with the Eagles at number 85. So this is the pick that they get from Indianapolis in the trade for Carson Wentz. And I'm looking at Baron Browning out of Ohio State. They need linebacker help. And Baron Browning is a guy that can be a 3-down linebacker. You're not going to have to remove him off the field. This is a guy that can play on the outside and line up. They had him lining up against slot receivers. He and Pete Warner were lining up against slot receivers and tight ends and running backs. A guy that can rush the pass, he can bend off the edge, comes downhill against the run. To me, if he's available there for Philly, I think with one of those 2 third-round picks, if Brevin Jordan's off the board, then I think you can use that 70th overall pick on Baron Browning. I think Baron Browning's a guy that has starter potential early on in his career. And frankly, I think he could end up even sneaking into round number 2 if the Rams decide to go with the linebacker there early in day 2. Moving on to number 7, and I mentioned Detroit Lions, what they were going to do potentially. Would they take a quarterback again? I think if anything, we could potentially see them go with a receiver. You've got Kenny Golladay. He could potentially move on as a free agent. I think he'll command top dollar. You look at Marvin Jones. He may follow his quarterback, Matthew Stafford. Could also command top dollar as well. Danny Amendola, Mohamed Sanu, they're also free agents. So there's a good chance that, hey, even if Devontae Smith and Jamar Chase are off the board, Jalen Waddle can end up being a nice a consolation prize, if you will. And that's a pretty nice consolation prize. This is a guy that's drawing comparisons to Tyreek Hill. But, Detroit, they had the league's worst defense, and it was 30th against the pass, giving up nearly 320 yards a game. Then to make matters worse, Romeo Okwara, Everson Griffin finished with 13.5 of the team's 24 sacks, are free agents, may not be back. There isn't a Chase Young in the draft this year, but Gregory Rousseau, Kwity Paye could each garner consideration here. But what Pro Football Focus put out a stat that I thought was really awesome. The 5 linebackers that saw significant snaps for the Lions received a grade. None of them received a grade over 65. You bring in Micah Parsons. He's the most versatile linebacker in the draft. Make an immediate impact as a pass rusher. He's still learning, dropping into coverage, but he can immediately be a pass rush help and also have an impact on the 28th ranked run defense with that sideline to sideline athleticism. You know he's going to probably run in the 4.4s at 6'3", 245 pounds. I think this is where the Lions should go. Will they go there? Who knows? It's the Lions. But I think they've got Brad Holmes there, Dan Campbell. I think they have to address that defense first and foremost before they move anywhere else. So as I mentioned, Detroit sitting there, round number 2. They need a receiver with the 41st pick overall. Even if they re-sign Kenny Golladay or Marvin Jones, any one of those receivers, you're still going to need to add some additional receiving help. Right now, Quintez Cephas is the only wide receiver currently under contract with at least 15 receptions this past season. I'm looking at Amon-Ra St. Brown out of USC, 6'1", 195 pounds, fewer as reliable as St. Brown was for the Trojans, sudden off the line, smooth in his route running, fearless over the middle, a knack for finding openings in the defense to make a play, very cerebral player. He reminds me a bit of Robert Woods, another Trojan, who was a favorite target of Jared Goff's in LA. I think this could be his Robert Woods in Detroit. So that makes a ton of sense for me there. And then if we move on to round number 3, this is where the Lions will have a couple of picks. And Jalen Twyman at 72 overall, the 6'2", 290-pound junior defensive tackle for Pittsburgh. And I mentioned not only were they 28th in the league against in sacks, 28th in the league against the run, finding that interior presence who can be disruptive on all 3 downs is a must. And Twyman, look, few were as disruptive as him in his sophomore campaign in 2019. Burst off the ball, combined with that power at the point of attack, allowed him to blow up run plays and then collapse the pocket as an interior pass rusher, finished with 10.5 sacks, solidified him as one of the top interior pass rushers, and really the top pass rushers, regardless of position. He's got that squattier frame. He's only 6'2", 290. That's not ideal along the interior of the line. I think that's probably going to, take a hit to his draft stock. But that quick first step and then the hands and the power. He benched 225 33 times. We'll see what he does at his pro day. If he can even up that number even more, that's going to allow him to be that 3 technique like Geno Atkins. And I think the Lions, they're going to need that type of a player moving forward. And so Jalen Twyman makes a ton of sense for me. And then you look at number 89 overall. And again, that was the pick that they got from the Rams. And I'm looking at Nico Collins, another wide receiver, I know. But when you have four of your top receivers sitting there as free agents, at least a couple of them are going to be gone. So I'm looking at Nico Collins. He's 6'4", 215 pounds. And, look, don't look at the stats. Please don't look at the stats. He sat out 2020, and then the quarterback play was poor there at Michigan throughout his career. So you really have to look at the game film and watch this guy play. And I think he could end up being a steal because at 6'4", 215, he moves really well for his size. He runs well vertically, but then he can also sink his hips, allow him to separate in and out of those breaks, and then he uses that size to his advantage, really boxes that DB out, puts him on his back hip, and then attacks the ball in the air by extending those arms for it, making that defender really have to go all the way through him to get to the football, making it virtually impossible. I think Collins is going to be a more productive pro than he was when he was at Michigan. So I think that makes, again, he makes a ton of sense there to the Lions. And, could the Lions potentially go with a defensive end here, at some point in the draft? Sure. And I think you could potentially see that happen. But if they go Micah Parsons and you get Jalen Twyman, I think you could still end up going with an edge rusher there in round number 4 and be just fine. They could also decide that they're going to take a receiver later on in the draft, and that's usually traditionally what you'll see with a team is they'll go with a receiver or just any position if they're doubling up. They'll go with one early and another one late. If it's truly a pressing need, that's just a dire need, you may end up seeing a team take them with back-to-back picks or 2 picks on day 2 or 1 on day 1 and 1 on day 2. I think in this case, the receivers, at least right now, it's a pretty dire situation. We'll see what happens as free agency moves along. Carolina at number 8. I mentioned Mac Jones, and this is where I have Mac Jones coming off the board. He's 6'3", 214 pounds. Yes, they could go offensive line here. Yes, they could potentially address another linebacker position, get Micah Parsons, awfully enticing, if he ends up falling to number 8. But I think Carolina, they're looking to move for a quarterback. And, I think Teddy Bridgewater, we know that they're upgrading from him. And so when you look at Mac Jones, this dude is a stud, or was a stud at the Senior Bowl. The football IQ, his feel for the game, that made an impression on his head coach, who happened to be Matt Rule. The preparation, I talked about that in past podcasts, and I just look at Mac Jones, and should he be the number 8 overall pick? Probably not. But we said that about Daniel Jones, as I said earlier. And, at the end of the day, Matt Rule's shown that he not only is true to his draft board, but he also likes to take guys that he's familiar with. You see the guys from Temple and the guys from Baylor that are on the roster. He coached this guy in the Senior Bowl. I'm just saying, it could definitely happen. Looking at the number 39 overall pick, Carolina, they could go offensive tackle. But I think there's also a need at the corner position. Dante Jackson is holding down one of the starter spots, but I'm looking at Corn Elder, Rasul Douglas, both free agents. How about Greg Newsome out of Northwestern? He's 6'1", 190, battled some injuries in his time there with the Wildcats, but the ball skills are tremendous. 21 passes defended in 3 years there with the Wildcats. He trusts his eyes, takes great angles to the ball, times his jump well to make a play on the football. Physical on the edge and run support. Has the size, the fluidity. He could potentially be a first-round pick. If he falls to round 2, I think Carolina ends up bypassing the offensive tackle here and ends up going corner in round number 2, which then means you have to go offensive tackle in round 3. And one of my favorite players in the entire draft is Liam Eichenberg out of Notre Dame. 6'6", 305. Could he be a second-rounder? I actually had him going to Carolina in round 2 for a while. I think Carolina is going to be on the market for an offensive tackle. I think they try to re-sign Taylor Moton, the right tackle, but I think Russell Okung, he's 33 years of age. They can move on from him. Eichenberg, model of consistency, easy mover, natural knee bender, tremendous hands, very patient as a pass protector. Could definitely use some added strength to bring some more power to the run game, but he's definitely a week 1 starter in my book, and I think that would make a ton of sense for Carolina there. He just has that mentality that, it just feels like a Matt Rule type of guy, a guy that's going to bring that lunch pail, be a very workmanlike approach, and I think that's really what Matt Rule is looking for up front. Denver sitting there at number 9. There are rumors that they could potentially move on from Drew Lock. I don't see that happening this year. They could, depending on what happens with Von Miller, look at a guy like Micah Parsons here. But I think according to just looking at the draft board, how this is playing out so far, I think Caleb Farley is their guy here. I think Caleb Farley is the top corner in this draft, 6'2", 207. Really, I lied. I said that, but he's the first cornerback taken off the board. J.C. Horn is my QB, is my CB1, and we'll talk about that here when we get to J.C. Horn, when I have him coming off the board. But Denver needs a lockdown cornerback in a serious way, and I think Caleb Farley is going to be that guy. He sat out 2020, but he has the size, athleticism, physicality to be a press corner. Capable of taking over that number 1 cornerback spot. Look, AJ Boye, he was released. Brian Callahan's going to line up in the slot. And I think that cornerback position, that release of AJ Boye really told me a lot. They could target Stephon Gilmore in a trade potentially, but I think this pick is ultimately going to be used on the top cornerback that's on the board. And in this case, to me, I think it's Caleb Farley. Round 2, number 40 overall, the Broncos. Pass rush, mentioned what's going to happen with Von Miller, even if he does stick around. He has that non-contact ankle injury that sidelined him for all of 2020. Had some of those off-field issues as well. Was the subject of an investigation. Final year of his deal. He's 32 years of age. What's going to happen with his future? Look, J.J. Watt, we thought he was never going to leave Houston, and he's ultimately been released. Could potentially happen for the former Super Bowl MVP. And look, you got to find a running mate for Bradley Chubb. Even if Miller is back. You still have to have another guy that can team with Miller, because who knows how he will adjust to coming back from that non-contact injury. And I think the best edge rusher in the draft is Ronnie Perkins out of Oklahoma, 6'3", 247. This is a dude, look, he missed those 5 games following that positive marijuana test that caused him to miss that Peach Bowl last season. Sat out the first 5 games, and I'll tell you what, when he came back, that changed the whole complexion of that Sooner defense. That Sooner defense the first few games was awful. Then all of a sudden, Perkins comes in, and suddenly Perrion Winfrey is getting after it. Nick Benito stepped up his game. Isaiah Thomas, was the DN that was holding things down, but Perkins helped elevate his game. That defense just completely looked different. There were guys flying around to the football, and you had Perkins. That energy was infectious. One-man wrecking crew coming off the edge. That burst, the hand usage, the ability to convert speed to power, driving his man into the backfield, also showing his ability to get off blocks, shoot gaps into the backfield against the run. Look, as I said, that nonstop motor, guys are rallying to the football in numbers. You saw the crimson and cream around the football, unlike, we've seen it in some time. And I have to give a lot of that credit. Yes, Alex Grinch, deserves a ton of credit there as a defensive coordinator. But Ronnie Perkins, man, there was a clear change in that offense. In that defense when he took the field. Same goes for Ramondre Stevenson. That offense struggled with running the football. Suddenly Ramondre Stevenson shows up, and man, that was a lethal team down the stretch. Round 3, 71 overall. Look, Justin Simmons is a free agent. He's going to command top dollar. If Denver wants to move on, I think they may find his replacement in the draft. And I'm looking at Javon Holland out of Oregon. Look, he's 6'1", 196, impressive instincts and ball skills, 9 interceptions in 2 seasons with the Ducks, sat out this past season due to COVID, has some cover skills as well, can potentially take on that receiver in the slot. And then he averaged 15.3 yards per punt return in 2019, so I think he could also add some of that special teams value as well, which would up that draft stock a little bit for him as well. So then taking a look at Dallas sitting there at number 10, Rashawn Slater is my guy. I think corner could still end up being the pick here. Patrick Surtain, the second, reuniting him with Trevin Diggs could end up happening. But that offensive line, it's just, man, Tyron Smith, Lyle Collins, Zach Martin, all injured, during the season. And it's funny, on paper, everyone's set in terms of being signed. Only Connor Williams is not signed through the 2023 season, but when you've got a guy like Tyron Smith, he saw that streak of 7 consecutive Pro Bowls snap this past season after that neck injury required surgery. That cuts into his season after just 2 games. And 2020 was the 5th consecutive season that Smith missed at least 4 games due to injury. And when he went down, that offensive line just wasn't the same. When he's healthy, he's one of the top offensive tackles in the league, but how much longer can that body hold up? And what's nice about Slater is he has that 5-position versatility to where you can line him up anywhere on the line, and I think he can end up being that utility offensive lineman in his rookie season. And then ultimately, just history has shown that somebody's going to get hurt, and then you can just plug Slater in, and then ultimately if Smith decides to call it a career, or they don't re-sign Connor Williams after this upcoming season, then you can end up moving in Rashawn Slater there, with the thought being that whenever Tyron Smith does call it a career, they can end up moving him over to the left tackle position. So I think Rashawn Slater makes a ton of sense here. You're getting a guy who's probably a top 5 or 6 player in this draft. So that'd be a nice pickup there for Jerry Jones and company. Looking at round 2, look, if Trevon Merrick is still on the board at 44, I think Dallas has to take that in-state product. I think, TCU, they had a couple of really nice safeties. Ardarius Washington was the other one, but Merrick, clear-cut top safety prospect, Jim Thorpe Award winner, 6 interceptions, 20 pass breakups. Also racking up over 100 tackles in the past 2 seasons for the Horned Frogs. This is a guy that can play well in the box against the run, can also obviously play over the top in pass defense. He'd be a nice upgrade over Xavier Woods, probably gone in free agency. I think that makes a ton of sense if he's there on the board. If not, then maybe they try to go after Andre Sisco. And then at number 75, that's where they can get their corner. And it's not a name, if you're a Dallas Cowboy fan, you're expecting a Power 5 guy. I'm actually going after a group of 5 dude who ended up actually having, led the nation with 16 pass breakups in 2020. I think that number would really catch the eye of Jerry Jones, nation leader in pass breakups. Why not? And so you look at Shamar Jean-Charles out of Appalachian State. He's only 5'11", 190 pounds, but he's an instinctive ball hawk. Tremendous job driving on the football, challenging receivers at the catch point. Got pretty long arms, even though he's only 5'11". To me, if Chidobe Awuzie, Jordan Lewis are gone, it makes a ton of sense to nab Shamar Jean-Charles there in round number 3. Now we're moving on to the Giants there at number 11. And Joe Judge, look, just one win away from winning that NFC East in his first season. And when you look at the passing attack, you got Darius Slayton and Evan Ingram, finished first and third in receiving yards, but they also racked up 16 drops between the two of them. Evan Ingram with 11, Darius Slayton with 5. And look, I know Evan Ingram was a Pro Bowler, but man, they got to get more consistent play out of the receivers. Sterling Shepard, Golden Tate were their other 2 top receiving targets. They're much more reliable, but they're both under 6 feet tall. You got to have a reliable downfield weapon. That's going to be critical for Daniel Jones. And Kyle Pitts, like I said, he's special. 6'5", 246, the junior. Not only was he a Mackey Award winner for the top tight end, he was also a Biletnikoff finalist for the top wide receiver. This dude does it all. The wingspan, the ball skills, way too much size for the DBs, too much speed for the linebackers, and for a lot of the corners too. He was running by a lot of guys. And I mean, the ESPN has Randy Moss and the You Got Moss. I don't know how many times he was doing that to guys like Tyson Campbell, to J.C. Horn, you name it. Kyle Pitts was going up against the best. Ran away from Kelvin Joseph. It didn't matter who Kyle Pitts lined up against. He was just absolutely dominating him. And I think, if nothing else, you put Kyle Pitts, you can line him up wherever. He can be a receiver type there for you. And you look at the impact that Travis Kelce's had, Kyle Pitts will have the exact same impact. And I think that'll just be a welcome addition for Daniel Jones, who's starving for that big downfield target. Round 2, 42 overall. Giants, I'm looking at Joe Tryon out of Washington, 6'5", 262 pounds. Leonard Williams, look, had a career year, first full season with the Giants, 11.5 sacks. Fellow starters up front, Dexter Lawrence, Dalvin Tomlinson, combined for 7.5, but then they lacked any type of rush off the edge. Kyler Fackrell did manage to get 4 sacks, but, look, Jabal Sheard, Lorenzo Carter, O'Shane Ximines, Carter Coughlin managed just 3.5 sacks between that group. They need to get better coming off the edge to take some of that pressure off that defensive front. Joe Tryon, physical presence coming off the edge, drives his man into the backfield coming off the edge there. Very heavy-handed, decent speed, motor that never quits. Had 8.5 sacks in 2019, sat out 2020. I think that's why he ends up falling to day 2. But that'd be a nice pickup there for the Giants. And then moving on to round 3, Saquon Barkley had that torn ACL, real blow to the franchise, never really recovered with that ground game. Wayne Gallman, Alfred Morris, Dion Lewis, they combined for just over 1,200 yards on the ground. Devontae Smith was brought in for just 5 games. That experiment didn't really pan out. And so those 3 other running backs that I mentioned, they're all free agents. I think the Giants could be on the market for a complimentary back to Barkley. And Kenneth Gainwell out of Memphis, 5'11", 191 pounds, sat out this past season, but as a redshirt freshman in 2019, just under 1,500 yards on the ground and 13 touchdowns, also caught 51 passes for another 610 yards. That'd be a nice change of pace to complement Saquon Barkley, just saying. So we're going to continue to move on, and I feel like we're going to be talking about the same picks in the top 15, so I promise in the next couple of days I will get another podcast because we're coming to an end here. I want to go ahead and go over a couple of more teams before we do wrap things up, but I'm looking at San Francisco at number 12 and Trey Lance, 6'4", 228 pounds, North Dakota State, redshirt sophomore. Look, Jimmy Garoppolo's time in San Francisco has been a rocky one. Now he's on the hot seat as a starter, still under contract through the 2022 season. So the Niners don't necessarily need to replace him right away, but you add a quarterback to the roster, that is going to be expected. And I think they may need to target their quarterback of the future. If this isn't a quarterback, look, Richard Sherman, Ahkello Witherspoon, K'Wan Williams, Jason Verrett, Jamar Taylor are all free agents. Emmanuel Mosley, a restricted free agent. That leaves two guys, Tim Harris and Adonis Alexander, as the only corners under contract currently. But you look at Trey Lance, if he does fall to number 12, my goodness, that redshirt freshman season was ridiculous. 2,786 yards passing, completing 66.9% of his passes, 28 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and ran for 1,100 yards. He is the guy that's that prototypical quarterback that's going to be that next generation guy. He's still young, still developing, and so that's one of the things to where he can play behind Jimmy Garoppolo by his time before he takes over the team, sit behind him for a year or two. Why not? And then rather than be thrust into that starting spot right away, you saw that it worked out well for Patrick Mahomes. So I think a similar thing could happen there for Trey Lance. So moving on for the 49ers, I mentioned that cornerback position, and Tyson Campbell out of Georgia, get him in round 2 at number 43 overall, 6'2", 185 pounds, a junior. A lot of people have him coming off the board in round number 1 in their in their mock drafts. And look, they need a physical corner on the outside to deal with DeAndre Hopkins, DK Metcalf, Robert Woods twice a year. And Campbell often saw the top wide receiver for the opposing SEC teams last year, more than held his own. Uses that length to his advantage. He put out some bad tape. He did get beat, quite a bit, by some of the bigger receivers as well. But this is a guy who, he more than holds his own. He makes it difficult for the quarterbacks on the outside. Has that tremendous length. So I think he'd be a nice pickup there for San Francisco in round number 2. That's why the bad tape, I think, is what causes him to fall. San Francisco sitting there at 103rd overall. They need to address their line. They could potentially go with a tackle, but I think ultimately they go to the interior of the line. Aaron Banks, All-American season, 6'6", 330 pounds, very stout at the point of attack, physical guy. I think he's a guy that his play reminds me a little bit of Mike Iupati, just because he's so physical, wants to beat you up a little bit on the interior of the line, shows a little bit of a burst for a big guy as well. So, I think Aaron Banks makes a ton of sense for the 49ers there in round number 3. Moving on to the Chargers at number 13 overall. Christian Darrisaw, 6'5", 314 pounds, the junior out of Virginia Tech. Look, one thing is clear in LA, Justin Herbert is their franchise quarterback. Finished the rookie season throwing for over 4,000 yards. 4,336 yards was second all-time among rookies. It was 37 yards behind Andrew Luck for the top. His completion percentage of 66.6 was second only to Dak Prescott's 67.8. Interception total of just 10 tied him with Russell Wilson for 4th fewest, and those 31 touchdowns thrown were the most by any quarterback in history. You got to protect your investment. You can talk about the defense all you want. You got to protect your investment first and foremost. Move Brian Bulaga over to the right tackle position. Let's not mess around anymore. Let's get that left tackle. And Christian Darrisaw could potentially be the top overall pass protector in this draft, just with that athleticism, very balanced, light on his feet, also a road grader in the running game. And he's a top 3 tackle. To get him there at number 13 would be a nice get for the Chargers. I think the Chargers doubled down at the offensive line, and they actually go after Trey Smith in round number 2. Could be a little crazy there, but look, Trey Smith, 6'5", 335 pounds out of Tennessee. We all know his story. He was a freshman All-American, left tackle there for the Vols. Had the blood clots that really eliminated the 2018 season. Was able to get that taken care of. 2019 shows up as a guard. And really 2020 was when he finally got his legs under him again. And when you want to talk about power, this dude's got power. He jolts you with that punch at the point of attack. and gets you off balance. And then once he does that, he's going to grab onto you and he's not going to let go. And you're not going to like what happens. He's going to drive you down the field and he's going to plant you. The lateral agility, that's why he's not playing tackle. So there are going to be some interior pass rushers that are going to be able to beat him because he doesn't necessarily change directions and move very well laterally. We want to talk about power. This dude's got power. And so when you look at the Chargers, you already have Dan Feeney and Forrest Lamp are free agents. Trey Turner only under contract for one more year. Makes a ton of sense for the Chargers sitting there in round number 2, which then means what do the Chargers do in round 3? They have to go corner, right? You know, you look at Casey Hayward, Chris Harris, you know, they're holding things down on the outside, but I think you can stand to have somebody there in the slot. Asante Samuel Jr., 5'10", 180 pounds, junior out of Florida State, didn't have an interception until he had 3 this past season. But he, you know, not only has tremendous bloodlines, but high football IQ, tremendous ball skills, fluid athlete, doesn't waste any movement, driving on the football to make a play, reads the quarterback's eyes, does a great job there. I think he'll see the field early there for the Chargers as their slot corner. I think that makes a ton of sense. Vikings. So here's a team. This is going to be an interesting pick. Vikings at 14. Look, they had a top 5 rushing attack, passing game that finished just outside the top 10. So at first glance, you'd think, all right, they're moving to the other side of the ball. Then you hear Pro Football Focus said that Minnesota's offensive line gave up 172 of the 214 pressures allowed, a number that was 11th highest in the league. And maybe you're like, all right, well, maybe they do go offensive line. They've already used 2 first-round picks. 2 second-round picks. Brian O'Neill in 2018, Ezra Cleveland in 2020, and a first-rounder on Garrett Bradbury in 2019. Would they do that again? I mean, it depends on what happens with Riley Reiff. And if Reif's off the board, maybe you go Elijah Vera Tucker out of SC. He's got the chops to handle both the tackle and guard positions. You do have a need of both. Potentially that could be the play. But I think the bigger concern, come on, let's not mess around. The defense ranked 27th in the league in total defense. You know, I know losing Michael Pierce, Eric Kendricks, Anthony Barr, either due to COVID opt-out or injury didn't help. But things then took a turn when Daniil Hunter had to sit out the 2020 season due to a neck injury as well. So I think, you know, they did try to beef up their pass rush, adding Yannick Ngakoue, 5 sacks in 6 games. Then he gets traded to Baltimore. His sack total in those 6 games still ended up leading the Vikings by season's end. I think DJ Wonnum looks like he can be a promising rookie, but I think Ifeadi Odenigbo, you know, in a larger role, took a major step back. That duo of Odenigbo and Wonnum just combined for 6.5 sacks, and the team finished for 28th in the league, getting to the quarterback just 23 times. Kwity Paye, don't just look at the numbers. In 4 games, he had just 2 sacks as a senior. But during that time, he also racked up 22 pressures. Dominant edge rusher for the Wolverines. He and Aiden Hutchinson were so much fun to watch. His hands are, tremendous power in those. He bends well coming off the edge as well. Very versatile to both rush off the edge and as an interior rusher. That versatility, something that the Vikings would love to have. And I think Kwity Paye would pair very well with a guy like Daniil Hunter, who hopefully will be 100% by the start of the season. So Minnesota is without a second-round pick. They actually traded that to Jacksonville. So then we're going to be moving into round number 3. And in round 3, Minnesota, it's going to be interesting to see exactly how this all plays out, because I think they do need to address the interior of their defensive line and their offensive tackle position. So I think there's a chance they can get Marvin Williams at that number 79 overall pick. They need a 3 technique, and if they can land Marvin Wilson here, that would be awesome. 6'4", 311 pounds, once a surefire first rounder. Offers tremendous size, burst off the ball, tremendous hands. There's still some people that say that he's their number 1 defensive tackle. Production didn't always match the potential. In 2019, 6.5 of his 8.5 tackles for loss and 4 of his 5 sacks were registered in just 2 games against Louisville and Syracuse. His play was largely inconsistent. His motor ran hot and cold. He'd lose leverage coming off the ball and get handled easily by a single defender. To me, the eye test. They say trust your eyes, trust what you're watching on the game film. And to me, my eyes just didn't see a player that was worthy of being drafted in the first 2 rounds of the draft. I think round 3 would be nice value, and I think Minnesota at that point, it'd be kind of hard to pass on him. At number 91 overall, the Vikings get this pick from Baltimore, and I think this is where they go with their offensive tackle. Brady Christensen may not be ready to start right away. I think he needs to add some strength. He's more of a finesse tackle, a guy that's light on his feet, but doesn't generate a ton of power. He's 6'6", 300 pounds. There were a few guys that were as consistent in pass protection, though. He was a first-team All-American. Gets out of his stance so quickly, maintains that low pad level, good knee bend, excellent lateral quickness with that kick slide. Also able to head off some of those counter moves as well, especially with the spin moves to the inside. I think he lines up at left tackle. Brian O'Neill can stay at right tackle. I think Ezra Cleveland, you can leave him inside. Garrett Bradbury there at the center position. That offensive line really started to take shape. And look, Riley Reif, you can keep him there at left tackle. And depending on how, you don't have to rush Brady Christensen into a left tackle position right away. But if Brady Christensen really starts coming on in the preseason, then consider moving Riley Reif to guard. Be worth a shot there. Wouldn't be the first time you've seen a tackle moved inside to guard, but I think that could potentially bode well for the Vikings. So we're going to get through 2 more teams here, and then we'll call it a podcast. I'm looking at number 15 and the New England Patriots. I know New England fans would kill me for that, but the New England Patriots sitting at number 15. And we know life after Tom Brady wasn't very kind to Bill Belichick in 2020. I don't need to tell any Patriot fans. They finished 3rd in the AFC East, failed to make the playoffs for the first time since in 2008. You look at Cam Newton, that experiment didn't really pan out for them. Jarrett Stidham made it clear he's not the answer either. So they're going back to the drawing board, and Mac Jones does seem like the perfect Bill Belichick guy. Preparation, and hard work. Seems like a Tom Brady type of guy, just in terms of that same mentality, not the most athletically gifted. So it makes a ton of sense there, but unless they pursue a trade, getting up into the draft, they're not going to be able to land Jones. Maybe, they have Newton run it back and they bring him back onto the roster. But I think, they're looking at that receiver position. They have to get some weapons for whoever's under center. Jacoby Myers and Damiere Byrd, both solid complementary receivers. They should not be leading your team in receiving. I'm sorry. My apologies to Jacoby and Damiere, but I think they're complementary receivers. They're not number 1 wideouts. They weren't number 1 wideouts at their respective universities, so I don't see that happening there for the Patriots. You look at it, Julian Edelman, he's 34 years of age, only played in 6 games in 2020, entering the final year of his deal. And then 2019 first round pick N'Keal Harry managed just 400 yards receiving and 4 touchdowns in his first 2 seasons in the league. There just isn't a player on the roster that can stretch defenses vertically. So if you get a chance to take Jalen Waddle, the clone, if you will, of Tyreek Hill, you take him. But this is a dude who posted 2 touchdowns, over 80 yards in just 6 games this past season before his injury. It makes a ton of sense to me if you can land him. Could they also use a playmaker on defense? Sure. If Micah Parsons falls, that could be a guy that they could land here. They had just 24 sacks a season ago, and the only player to register over 5 sacks was Chase Winovich with 5.5. So Micah Parsons, if he does fall, Jalen Waddle may not be on the board either, but if he is, to me, it's a no-brainer. I think the Patriots, this is a pick that they have to make. 46 overall. Patriots, look, I think they need to retool that defensive line. Their top interior linemen, Lawrence Guy, Adam Butler, Dietrich Wise, they're all free agents. Guy's the best of the bunch. He's the team captain, so he'll probably come back. He can play any position along the interior as well. But when you look at the Patriots, I think they would jump on the chance to land a guy like Levi Onwuzurike in round number 2 if he falls that far. 6'3", 293, delivers a tremendous punch off the ball. Excellent job controlling his man, often bench pressing him to get him off his block, and then just devastating when he arrives to the football. He needs to watch that pad level though. He gets completely neutralized every time he stands up too high out of his stance, and I saw that happen time and time again there for the Huskies. But Onwuzurike, he also sat out the 2020 season, but he looked solid in Senior Bowl play. So he'll be a guy that could come off the board in round number 1, but I think the Patriots would love to land him if he does fall to round number 2. So I think the Patriots, their other pick, in round number 3, 77, was forfeited, but they do get a pick, number 97 overall. And I think they look for another defensive lineman. I think they need to get some guys that can be disruptive up front. And I'm looking at Jay Tufele there out of USC, 6'3", 305, a 3-down lineman there for the Trojans, was a quick penetrator against the run, the burst in the hands, along with that nice quick spin move to beat blocks and get after the passer. Another guy that needs to watch his pad level, can get neutralized when he gets too high coming off the ball, but he's definitely scheme versatile, a guy that doesn't have to come off the field. So I think that's another guy that can be a perfect fit for Bill Belichick. And then finally, let's go to the Cardinals, number 16 overall. And this is where J.C. Horn, my number 1 corner, goes. He's 6'1", 205 out of South Carolina, the junior. Could they potentially go Kadarius Toney here? I think they need a number 2 for DeAndre Hopkins. I think Toney would be an upgrade over Christian Kirk, who I think still is a solid receiver, but I think they need some more, someone dynamic opposite DeAndre Hopkins. Then there's the the outside linebacker position. Chandler Jones under contract through next season, but they still have to decide what's going to happen with Hassan Reddick and Marcus Golden. Reddick, career year, so he could potentially be gone. May earn a ton of money after registering 12 and a half sacks and then getting another 16 quarterback hits. Azeez Ojulari could potentially be the guy here. I think it makes a ton of sense, but I think the biggest need right now is at corner. Patrick Peterson, Drake Kirkpatrick, both free agents. Peterson spent all 10 years of his career in the league with Arizona, so I think he has to test the free agent market. He could potentially be gone. Drake Kirkpatrick, 1-year rental, I'm thinking, after Robert Alford tore that pectoral muscle before the season. I think Byron Murphy is going to be a keeper, but you may have to replace a 3-time first-team all-pro corner and an 8-time Pro Bowler. That's a tall task. But I think if you can get a physical corner like J.C. Horn, that's a good start, at least. Equally adept in man and zone coverage, though I think he's best as a press man guy. Has tremendous ball skills. Showcase that against some of the top receivers in the country. Watch him against Seth Williams there for Auburn. I thought he did a tremendous job all game long. Tremendous bloodlines. The son of NFL vet Joe Horn. I think the Cards would be excited to land him there in the middle of round number 1. As you move along for Arizona into day 2, I think you have to have them look at a running back at some point in day 2. And I'm looking at 49 overall. Kenyon Drake is a free agent this offseason, finishing just 45 yards of 1,000 yards. But even if he's re-signed, I think they need another back to take some pressure off the quarterback, Kyler Murray, essentially, because he was the team's second leading rusher. And I'm looking at Javonte Williams. He was the thunder to Michael Carter's lightning with the Tar Heels. Could do the same for Drake in Arizona, or become the feature back if you need him to. Racked up nearly 2,100 yards, caught 42 passes the last 2 seasons with the Tar Heels. Known for that strength between the tackles and the contact balance, refusing to go down after initial contact. But he also has that vision in the cutback lanes, surprising lateral agility to cut on a dime, get to the hole, burst to the second level. Now, if you haven't seen he and Michael Carter, what they did against Miami, it's a must watch. They were ridiculous. Ran for 544 yards and 5 touchdowns between the two of them against the U. It was just phenomenal to watch. Javonte Williams is 5'10", 220 pounds. He'll bring some physicality there to Arizona. I think that makes perfect sense. in round number 2. I'm a big fan of Javonte Williams. I think his draft stock will only continue to increase. And I mentioned the edge rusher. I'm planning on Hassan Reddick not being there in Arizona. So I'm looking at a guy like Chris Rumph out of Duke. He's 6'3", 226 pounds. The junior, he's pretty slight, needs to add some weight, but he's one of the more explosive edge rushers coming off the edge. I think he's one of those guys that if you get your hands on him, I think you can neutralize him, which is why he has to play in space. But look, he still is able to shoot into the backfield. 33 tackles for loss, 17.5 sacks, also has 5 pass breakups, uses his length to his advantage. So I think round 3 is probably the right value. At one point, we were talking about him as possibly one of the top edge rushers in the draft. You watch him in 2020, he still had he had more sacks than he did in 2019. Had 8 sacks in 2020, 6.5 in 2019. But it was just one of those things where I thought he got outplayed by the other edge rusher on that team, Victor Dimukeje, who I think could end up being off the board as early as round number 4. I think he's got some talent and one of those guys who can be a sneaky, underrated player. So those are my first 16 picks in the draft, and really what I expect those teams to do in the first 2 days of the draft. So again, made some changes to my first round, which is ultimately why we had to kind of backtrack a little bit. But I wanted to at least kind of walk through my thought process in terms of looking at rounds 2 and 3 as well, because determining what the top need is, who's going to be the best player available, and what's going to ultimately happen in rounds 2 and 3. If you can ultimately still land a really solid player, a really good player, and a really good fit in rounds 2 and 3, I think you have to make some of those decisions. And so that's kind of how I played some of these things out. And in a couple of days, we'll pick things up. We'll go 17 through 32, and I know that not every team had a pick in round number 1. So like for the Houstons, the Seattles, and the Rams, we'll make sure to cover their draft picks. LA is probably going to be pretty short. They traded away some draft picks. There won't be a ton there. But Houston, look, they traded away their first and second round picks in 2020, so not a whole lot to cover there either. But depending on what happens with Deshaun Watson, things may change, and we'll be having a completely different conversation here come April. So we're going to go ahead and call it a podcast for now. And like I said, in a couple of days, be on the lookout for episode 20, where we'll cover 17 through 32, along with the remaining teams that didn't have a first-round pick. And we'll look at the first 2 days of the draft. So for ReadyForTheDraft.com, this has been the Ready for the Draft podcast. I'm your host, Gregg Schutze. Enjoy your week, everyone. Take care. See you in a couple of days. And until then, I am out of here. Take care.